My husband died in an accident, but I saw him in a cafe recently. But what happened next is shocking. Grief is a strange thing. One day, you're drowning in it, unable to move, unable to breathe. The next, you're just existing, not really happy, not really sad, just going through the motions, pretending to be okay. That's where I was. It had been 3 months since I lost my husband, Ryan, in a freak car accident. 3 months since I planned his funeral, signed the papers, picked out the casket, and watched them lower him into the ground. 3 months of waking up to an empty bed, staring at his old t-shirts folded neatly in the closet, wondering if I'd ever feel normal again. And then, I saw him. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished a meeting and decided to stop by a little cafe near my office. I ordered my usual, black coffee, splash of oat milk, and sat by the window, scrolling through my phone. It was one of those moments where I almost felt normal, like I was just another person going about her day. Then I looked up, and my world stopped. At a corner table, sitting casually, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world, was Ryan. I felt the blood drain from my face. My stomach twisted so violently, I thought I was going to be sick. It wasn't just someone who looked like him, it was him. Same strong jawline, same dimple in his left cheek, same nervous tick, rubbing his hands together when he was deep in thought. I blinked, convinced I was losing it. Ryan was dead. I had seen his broken body. I had cried myself to sleep for months. But there he was, alive, laughing. And he wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, blonde, pretty, maybe early 30s. She leaned in close, smiling like she was completely wrapped up in him. I couldn't move. My whole body felt like it was shutting down. Was this some kind of sick joke? A hallucination? A cruel trick my grief-stricken mind was playing on me. But no matter how many times I blinked, he didn't disappear. My heart pounded in my ears. My hands trembled as I pushed my chair back. My legs felt weak, but somehow I forced myself to move. I had to know. Step by step, I made my way toward the table, my pulse hammering so hard it was making me lightheaded. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. I stopped right in front of him, close enough to see the freckles on his hands, close enough to hear him breathe. I swallowed hard and forced the words out. Ryan. He looked up. Our eyes met. My heart slammed against my ribs. I braced myself for the moment of recognition, for the shock, the explanation, something. Instead, his brow furrowed slightly. He looked confused, like he had never seen me before, in his life. Sorry. Do I know you? Everything inside me went still. No, this wasn't right. This wasn't possible. And yet, the man in front of me, my husband, my dead husband, was looking at me like I was a complete stranger. I couldn't speak. The cafe seemed to blur around me, the hum of conversation and clinking dishes fading into white noise. All I could focus on was him, the man who looked exactly like my husband, sitting just feet away, staring at me like I was a complete stranger. Ryan. My voice cracked. My hands were shaking. It's me. Your wife. The words felt wrong even as I said them. How could I be explaining who I was to the man I had spent years building a life with? The woman sitting across from him tensed. She glanced at him, then at me, a wary expression crossing her face. Ethan. What is she talking about? Ethan. My stomach flipped. No way. I turned back to Ryan. Ethan. Whoever the hell he was. His face was unreadable, but his hands were trembling. Something inside me snapped. I dug into my bag, fingers fumbling as I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it, but I managed to scroll to my photos. I held the screen up to him. A picture of us, taken last year. Ryan had his arm around me, both of us grinning like we didn't have a care in the world. This is you, I whispered. This is us. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Panic? Recognition? Guilt? Then, without another word, he stood up, grabbed the woman's hand, and bolted. I was too stunned to move, too stunned to process what just happened. My dead husband had just run away from me, and suddenly, I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was terrified. For a moment, I couldn't move. The cafe felt distant, like I was watching everything happen from outside my own body. People were staring, whispering, probably wondering why I had just accused some random man of being my dead husband. But I didn't care, because Ryan, Ethan, whoever the hell he was, had just run. And people don't run unless they have something to hide. Before I could even think, my legs moved on their own. I ran after him. Chairs scraped against the floor as I shoved past tables, my breath catching in my throat. By the time I burst through the cafe doors, I spotted them, him and the blonde woman, walking quickly down the sidewalk, heading toward the corner. I sprinted. "Ryan!" I shouted, my voice cracking. He didn't stop. If anything, he moved faster. He practically dragged the woman along, gripping her wrist as they turned the corner. But I wasn't going to let him get away. Adrenaline surged through me as I pushed harder, dodging past pedestrians who gave me confused or annoyed looks. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in sharp bursts, but I didn't care, because I knew it was him. Not a look-alike, not some random stranger with the same face. I knew my husband, the way he walked, the slight turn of his head when someone spoke to him, the way his jaw clenched when he was anxious. And right now, he was anxious. "Stop!" I yelled again. "Ryan, please!" He didn't. But then, he looked back, just for a second. And in that second, I saw it. Recognition. Fear. My heart dropped. He knew me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. He wasn't some stranger. He knew exactly who I was. And he was running anyway. "Ryan, stop!" I screamed, but it was too late. He yanked open the door of a black SUV parked by the curb, practically shoving the blonde woman inside before jumping into the driver's seat. I ran faster, my fingertips brushing the back of the car just as the tires screeched against the pavement. I stumbled back, watching helplessly as the SUV sped off. Traffic swallowed them in seconds, horns blaring as he weaved recklessly down the street. I stood there, gasping for breath, my chest tight with something that wasn't just exhaustion. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a coincidence. Something was very, very wrong, and I was going to find out exactly what. I stood there, my breath ragged, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip a street sign just to steady myself. The black SUV was gone. My dead husband had just driven away like I was a stranger on the street. People around me had moved on, barely paying attention to the woman who had just chased after a man screaming his name. Maybe they thought it was just another breakup, some dramatic fight between lovers. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know I had buried that man 3 months ago. I forced myself to breathe, trying to make sense of what just happened. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe this was some kind of grief-induced hallucination. But no. I had touched the back of his car. I had felt the heat of the engine. I had seen the fear in his eyes. This was real. And if it was real, there were only a few possibilities. Ryan had a long-lost twin. Unlikely. I had met his entire family. No secret brothers. No estranged relatives. It was a cruel prank. But why? Who would do something this elaborate? Who would go so far as to fake an identity, create an entire life with another woman, only to run the second I confronted him? Ryan never actually died. That one made me feel sick. I had seen his body. I had identified him at the morgue. The funeral wasn't closed casket. And yet, something wasn't adding up. My mind raced back to the accident, the call from the police, the way everything had moved so fast, the fact that I had been too wrecked to question anything. Could I have been wrong? Could someone else have been in that car? Could Ryan have survived somehow, faked his own death? But if he did, why? Why would he abandon me? And who the hell was the woman he was with? I took a deep breath, trying to push back the nausea swirling in my stomach. My hands were still trembling, as I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my last text conversation with Ryan, 3 months old. The last thing he ever sent me was, "Love you. See you soon." A lie. I clenched my jaw and swallowed hard. No matter what was going on, whether this was some kind of mistake, a conspiracy, or a nightmare I hadn't woken up from, I needed answers. And there was only one place to start: the grave. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Sitting in that cafe, laughing like he hadn't abandoned me, looking me in the eye and saying, "Sorry, do I know you?" before running away like a coward. By the time the sun came up, I had already made up my mind. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that Ryan was actually buried in that grave. Because right now, I wasn't so sure. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the cemetery. It was early, the sky still streaked with pale pinks and oranges, the air crisp with morning dew. The place was empty, except for an old man trimming some bushes near the entrance. I parked and walked toward Ryan's grave, my pulse hammering with every step. The familiar path sent a shiver down my spine. I had been here so many times, sitting in front of his headstone, talking to him, crying, mourning. But now I wasn't sure who or what I had been grieving. I reached his headstone, the one I had picked out myself. Ryan James Carter, beloved husband, son, and friend. A lump formed in my throat. I knelt down and placed my hand on the cold stone. And then, for the first time in 3 months, I let myself ask the question out loud. "Are you really in there?" I didn't expect an answer, but God, I wanted one. I pulled out my phone and took a deep breath. If I was going to do this, I needed help. Someone who wouldn't think I was crazy. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on the one name I could trust: Jake. Jake had been Ryan's best friend since college. He had been at my side through the funeral, the worst days of my life. If there was anyone who would help me with this, it was him. I hit call. After a few rings, his groggy voice answered, "Hey, what's up? You okay?" I swallowed hard. "Jake, I need you to help me do something." A pause. "Okay, what kind of something are we talking about?" I hesitated, then said it. "I need to exhume Ryan's body." Silence, then laughter. "Good one," Jake chuckled. "You almost got me." "I'm not joking." My voice came out cold, dead serious. Another pause. This time there was no laughter, just confusion. "Okay, what the hell is going on?" I gripped the phone tighter. "I saw him." "Jake?" "Saw who?" "Ryan." Another silence. Longer this time. He was trying to process what I had just said, trying to figure out if I was messing with him or losing my mind. Finally, he sighed. "Meet me at my place. Now." I turned and walked back toward my car, one thought echoing in my head. If Ryan was still alive, then who the hell was buried in his grave? Jake lived about 15 minutes away, but my hands were gripping the wheel so tightly that I barely remembered the drive. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Ryan was alive. I saw him, and if he was alive, that meant the body I had buried wasn't him. Or was I losing my mind? I shook that thought away. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw. I pulled up to Jake's apartment, barely putting my car in park before yanking open the door and rushing up the steps. I knocked hard, more like pounded, until I heard his footsteps on the other side. The door swung open, and there he was, standing in sweatpants and a hoodie, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Jake had always been the logical one, the level-headed guy who kept everyone else grounded. But right now, even he looked nervous. He stepped aside. "Come in." I walked in, pacing immediately. I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to explain. "All right," he said, shutting the door. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the cafe, about Ryan, or Ethan, or whoever he was. I told him about the way he ran, the look in his eyes, the way he didn't just seem confused, He seemed scared. Jake didn't interrupt, didn't laugh. He just listened, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Then, when I finished, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Jesus, Emily. I swallowed. You believe me, right? He exhaled. I mean, I believe that you believe it, but you're asking me to dig up our best friend's grave. That's not exactly a normal Tuesday activity. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, neither's seeing your dead husband drinking a latte. Jake rubbed his face. Okay. He sat on the couch and motioned for me to sit too. Let's think this through. I sat, gripping my knees. There's nothing to think through. I need to know who's in that grave. Jake stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Let's do this the smart way. We're not just going to grab shovels in the middle of the night. I frowned. Then what do we do? He reached for his laptop. We get the autopsy report. If Ryan was buried, there had to be an autopsy. We need to know if there were any inconsistencies, any mistakes, anything weird. If something doesn't add up, he met my gaze. Then we find a way to dig deeper. No pun intended. For the first time since I saw Ryan in that cafe, I felt a flicker of hope. Because if anyone could help me figure this out, it was Jake. Jake was right. We couldn't just go full grave robber. Not yet, anyway. If Ryan's death was staged, or if a mistake had been made, there had to be evidence. And the first place to look? The autopsy report. Jake's fingers flew across the keyboard as he searched through records, his brows furrowed in concentration. Meanwhile, I sat on the couch, gripping my own hands, my leg bouncing with nervous energy. This is insane, I muttered. Completely insane. Yeah, well, welcome to my morning, Jake said, eyes glued to the screen. You know this is illegal, right? Getting someone's autopsy report without family permission? I looked at him. Jake, I am his family. That shut him up. After a few minutes of silence, he let out a sharp breath. Got something. I sat up straight. What? He turned the laptop toward me. Ryan's autopsy report. I swallowed hard and leaned in. The report was scanned in black and white, the pages full of medical jargon I could barely understand. But then, something jumped out. Wait. I pointed at one section, my pulse spiking. Cause of death, severe burns, and blunt force trauma. Jake nodded. Yeah, his car caught fire after the crash. They said he was barely recognizable. That's why I shot him a look, my skin going ice cold. Jake. I identified his body. His mouth opened slightly, realization dawning. I leaned back, my mind spinning. The body in the morgue wasn't burned beyond recognition. He had some bruising, some injuries, but it was Ryan. I would have noticed if something was off. Jake's expression turned serious. So, either this report is wrong, or the body you identified wasn't actually Ryan. A sick feeling curled in my stomach. Look at the rest, I whispered. Jake scrolled down, scanning the document. No dental records used for ID, just visual confirmation from next of kin. He exhaled sharply. Jesus, Emily, that means they just took your word for it. My blood ran cold. Ryan was never properly identified. My hands trembled as I whispered, Then whose body did I bury? Jake didn't answer. He didn't have to, because we both knew. There was only one way to find out. We had to get into that grave. Jake and I spent the next 2 days digging, metaphorically, not literally. Yet, we combed through records, social media, anything that might give us a clue about where Ryan, Ethan, whoever the hell he was, had disappeared to. And then, we found him. It was Jake who spotted it first. A blurry photo in the background of someone else's Instagram post, tagged at a restaurant 2 towns over. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We drove there that night. I don't know what I was expecting. To feel nervous? To hesitate? But I didn't. The second I saw him sitting there, laughing with the same blonde woman from the cafe, something inside me snapped. I walked straight up to his table, heart pounding, hands shaking, but my voice? Steady as hell. Ryan. His face paled. The color drained so fast I thought he might pass out. The woman turned to him, confused. Ethan? I clenched my jaw. Stop lying. I know who you are. He swallowed hard. Emily, I can explain. I slammed my hands on the table. Then do it. He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. Not here. Please. I didn't care about the scene we were making. I wanted the truth. Then start talking. The woman beside him, his new life, his new identity, looked between us, her confusion turning to horror. Ethan. What is she saying? His face crumpled. He looked at her, then back at me. He was trapped. I folded my arms. Who's in your grave, Ryan? The restaurant had gone quiet. I could feel people watching. I didn't care. Ryan, or Ethan, or whatever name he had chosen, broke. His shoulders slumped. He let out a slow, shaking breath. And then, finally, I had no choice.